You're not here for me. I'm Maurice Grant, and I'm up here tonight to introduce with elation, admiration, and pride, Chibuike Ogbonnaya, the 2024 Sparks Prize winner. But before I do that, I want to plug a couple of events we've got coming up this week in creative writing. The Revisions launch, that's the literary journal of the University of Notre Dame creative writing program, is here tomorrow night at 7 p.m. You should be there. It's going to be awesome. There's going to be some reading. It's going to be super. The other thing is the second Kelly reading. Jericho Brown, world famous poet Jericho Brown, is coming to our little burg to give the Kelly reading, and that is at the St. Joseph County Public Library.
Right.
Yeah, out in the community at 7 p.m. on Thursday. Before that, if that's not enough Jericho Brown for you, and how could it be, there's a conversation here on campus at the IRR Commons in Oshag, across the walk, at 2 p.m. also on Thursday. So that's a double dose there. Please show up. They're going to be great.
There'll be a dessert reception.
What's that?
There'll be a dessert reception too.
There will be a dessert reception after the reading.
Conversation.
After the conversation. So come to the conversation, get some dessert, get the blood sugar back up, and then go to the Kelly reading. So I'm very excited to be up. That Chibuike asked me to introduce them, to give the introduction tonight. I've been honored to be Chibuike's advisor. And I have to say, Chibuike is an immensely talented and dedicated writer, fiercely committed to their vision in a way that is exceptional, even in a program with students as dedicated as our own. It's just been an incredible gift. I know it hasn't always been easy, but I could tell all along from the beginning that Chibuike had a clear sense of where they were headed and what they were doing. Chibuike's work addresses themes of gender and sexual identity, the African diaspora, blackness, migration, and belonging. And I would say it's characterized by an incandescent attention to detail, an earnest thirst for connection, and a powerful sense of narrative structure. Chibuike's stories focus on queer and trans Nigerians navigating the legacies of colonial and post-colonial history, migration, Igbo culture and Christian faith, and the intricacies of cross-cultural, interracial, and globe-spanning queer relationships. On the surface, Chibuike's stories, like they always work at least two levels. And it's part of what I find so compelling about the work. On the surface, there's this finely textured depiction of daily life, psychological realism, relationships, people talking and having complicated engagements. But beneath and within those details move powerful currents of spiritual longing, poetic symbolism, and conflicted desire. Like there's this deep structure. It reminds me of the work of D.H. Lawrence or something, where there's this deep structure at work in the stories that's happening beneath and in the sort of the detail as it happens. For instance, in The Grief of Strangers, a grief-stricken man named Namani brings home a boy whose features remind him of his dead wife, initiating an ambiguous and complicated entanglement. In another story, Kindness, which I had the privilege to read in multiple drafts from workshop to thesis, a married Nigerian trans woman going to graduate school in DC lingers on the threshold of adultery as she grows more and more intimate with another Nigerian immigrant student. And then, of course, there's The Love of Sister Toby, which won Chibuike the Sparks Prize. And that story is about a devoutly Christian Nigerian trans woman who falls in love with a drug addict, and then he gets sent to prison. And much of the story has to do with the main character of Sister Toby's devotion to this apparent ne'er-do-well, and why that's happening and how it affects her relationship with other people in her community. It's really compelling work. Chibuike's stories reverberate beyond the page, echoing with mythic authority. It's been a pleasure and an honor to work with Chibuike and offer what help I could for their project, which is a truly astonishing collection of fiction. While completing their MFA, Chibuike was a charismatic and engaging presence in our community, always conscientious and generous with other students' work, and not only extremely talented, but dedicated, diligent, and ambitious. Chibuike has published several stories in various magazines and journals, attended a Tin House workshop and an American short story workshop, and was awarded a PEN American and Bear Life Review grant, a Lambda Literary Fellowship, an Anaphora Arts Writing Residency, and a Josephine K. Percy Memorial Award from the Indiana chapter of the National Society of Arts and Letters, among other honors. As you all may know, the Sparks Prize is annually awarded to a distinguished graduate of the Creative Writing Program as a post-graduation year of residency and writing time. Funded by Nicholas Sparks, woo! And judged each year by a different external writer. The award is based on the quality of the writing and the likelihood that the submission will be published or developed into a publishable book, which we're always hoping for. 2024 Sparks Prize judge Emily Rabbitoe, author of The Professor's Daughter, Searching for Zion and Lessons for Survival, selected Ogbonnaya's The Love of Sister Toby as the winning entry. Rabbitoe wrote, "The Love of Sister Toby is a rollicking, juicy, unique, and funny tale of queer love, faith, gossip, and community set in Indiana during the Trump years. I couldn't put it down." It's high praise. Chibuike has since revised their thesis into the story collection, The Daughters of Marsha P. Johnson, which I look forward to seeing in print someday in the not-too-distant future, I hope. Given Chibuike's talent and drive, I am certain that the Sparks Prize is only the first of many such awards. I'm excited to hear Chibuike read tonight, and even more excited to see what comes next. Let's have a
Thank you so much, Roy. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm so excited. So the late South African president, Nelson Mandela, once described Chinua Achebe's book as the writer in the presence of whom the prison walls came down. And lately I've been thinking about this in relationship to my writing residencies, because I feel like the prison walls that once held my ideas have also come down. And for the first time in a long while, I have been able to write clearly and with meaning. So thank you to the creative writing department, and also to Roy, who was my thesis advisor. Roy and I spent like so many hours in his office, which is filled with so many books, kind of like arguing and discussing, and I find that very helpful. So I've been anyway, it's still ongoing. So I spent the last 8 months kind of like reworking on my thesis. So it's now a novel in stories titled The Daughters of Marsha P. Johnson. It follows a group of trans Nigerians who once, during their teenage years, once described themselves as the daughters of Marsha P. Johnson based on her influence. And so now, as an adult, or as adults, that is where the collection or the novel in stories starts from. So I'll be reading one of the chapters from the collection. It's titled Ugonna. I don't have a better title for now, but yeah, that is what I have. So I'll just try to see it to make space for my laptop. Chapter 5, Ugonna. Why are you still ignoring your fiancé's calls and texts over a small matter? Ugonna's mother scolded over the phone. It had been a long phone call since Ugonna left her apartment for the library. Okay, I'll start again. Why are you still ignoring your fiancé's calls and texts over a small matter? Ugonna's mother scolded over the phone. It had been a long phone call since Ogbonna left her apartment for the library. But what Ogbonna wanted to say, what annoyed her these days, was that Fadeshola was having affairs with other trans women back home. Although she lacked evidence, she could sense it in his habit of postponing her trip to Nigeria. It reminded her of the married men she dated 2 years before meeting him, men who, mostly into oil and politics, sent their wives abroad so they could spend time with their mistresses. Sometimes, like now, since the quarrel 2 weeks ago, she wondered if the women he brought home stared at her photographs on the living room wall or the dresser in the bedroom. Did they avert their eyes, like she had done for the other men's wives, reminding herself the affair was for a while and that soon she'll get her life back? 3 years in a relationship is enough proof that he's a good man and that God is involved in this union, her mother said in Igbo, in her usual melodramatic tone. Ogbonna sighed. She had stopped beneath the trees in front of Krieger Hall to take in cool air before heading to the library a few feet away. The campus was calm and nearly empty, though more visible with international students. Across the lawn, 2 bare-chested Arab students tossed a frisbee back and forth. She wondered if they had, like her, left their apartments into this mid-afternoon heat because of loneliness. Even though he cancelled your trip, that does not mean you should insult him, her mother said, then paused to cough. Ogbonna changed the topic before her mother resumed scolding. She asked her in Igbo about her secretary job as she walked past a young man, probably in his late 20s, standing on the library steps and watching the students on the lawn. "Nwanne nwaanyị na-asụ Igbo," the man shouted when he heard her. Ben Carson's gifted hand slipped from his hands as he reached out and grabbed hers. "You speak Igbo, my sister." Ogbonna told her mother she would call back later as the man picked up his book. Then, surprisingly, he hugged her and exclaimed, "True to God, eh? I was not expecting to meet a Nigerian, I swear." He looked more shocked than she was, and as if realizing her surprise, he smiled and introduced himself. His name was Chiwetalu, and he had come for sightseeing. He had applied to Hopkins for a PhD in human genetics, inspired by his admiration for Ben Carson, but his application was rejected. He got accepted into Georgetown University. He had recently moved into the country and was living with his uncle, who told him he would enjoy seeing row houses in Baltimore. The uncle was not a blood relative, but someone from the same village as Chiwetalu. "Are you a new student?" Chiwetalu added. Ogbonna said no. She had been here since August last year, pursuing her MA in communication. She wanted to excuse herself and walk into the library. She was not in the mood to talk to a stranger. Chiwetalu coughed and then, more quietly, leaned forward and said, "Do you know where I can find rolling houses?" He looked embarrassed. Ogbonna chuckled, surprised that she could still command power in a fragile state, despite the loneliness that had deepened since the grudge with her fiancé. "You mean row houses?" she asked. "No, rolling houses," he said, his face serious. "It is called row houses," she said gently and smiled to ease his embarrassment. Chiwetalu stared at her, then chuckled and asked if she wouldn't mind showing him the houses. She should have said no and walked away. She should have lied that it was her research day, although she was researching her master's thesis on the effect of ethnicized use of language during Nigeria's presidential election. Since the grudge, she came to campus to pass time and left late at night to avoid the silence in her apartment. But she said yes to this man, a stranger, someone she barely knew, and walked him to North Charles Village, where the boulevard stretched long and brightly colored brick row houses sat side by side. "It is just a Victorian building," Chiwetalu said, staring at them as the long shadows fell across the sidewalk. "I thought it was the world's 7 wonders." Ogbonna laughed. "It does have an interesting history. I heard there's a contest called Painted Ladies, and you could win a lot of money for painting your house." "You don't mean it," Chiwetalu said. "You will win money for painting your house?" It is really true that these people don't know what to do with money. Ogbonna laughed again, very blunt of him. When her friends told her about the contest during her first year here, she said in that peculiar American way, "Oh my God, that's so cool." But it was not cool. She had wanted to say precisely what Chiwetalụ just said, but only once in America she had learned that her friends could not stand her bluntness. She watched Chiwetalụ take pictures of the building while telling a funny story about how, since it was his first time traveling abroad, he had abandoned a suitcase full of clothes. The Nigerian customs had tried to extort extra money. Then later, when it was time to head back to campus, for reasons she could not fully understand, she invited her to a studio apartment on Calvert Street for a glass of iced wine and even handed him a bottle of water before he left for DC. She was grateful she had taken out the trash that morning, sprayed air freshener, and lit her vanilla candle before leaving for campus. Since the quarrel, she had let her trash pile up, unwilling to confront the familiar smell of her apartment, that vanilla scent that used to suit her. On any other evenings, she would have told Fadishola about Chiwetalụ. They would have spoken for an hour or two, detailing their days. But instead, she called two of her friends back home and told them about this bushy Nigerian man she had just met. She recounted things she had not even noticed earlier, that he wore a suit on an afternoon heavy with heat and walked on his toes, the back of his feet never touching the ground. Her friends laughed so hard, their bonnet-wrapped heads sinking deeper into their pillows with each giggle. And when one of them started singing, "Roll, roll, roll your houses down to Baltimore," they all burst into laughter. Later that night, during her mother's usual call for evening devotion, she would think of Chiwetalụ again. After reciting 5 Hail Marys and shouting amen to her mother's prayer that God would strengthen her relationship with Fadishola, Ogbonna would giggle, her mind drifting back to Chiwetalụ's voice when he had whispered so sincerely, "Do you know where I can find rolling houses?" The grudge stemmed from an unfulfilled promise. Before Ogbonna left Nigeria, Fadishola had promised she would visit home during holidays. Fadishola had promised she would visit home during the holidays over the 2 years of her studies. He broke that promise twice, claiming he did not want her to fall victim to Trump's immigration policies. The first time was during Christmas break, when he advised her to wait until summer and cited the travel ban on Muslim-majority countries and the stories of tearful children being separated from their parents at the borders. Back then, she had seen reason in his words, this medical doctor fiancé of hers who had studied in the UK before returning home and was more experienced with immigration system. She had even laughed when he said he no longer watched thriller movies but preferred to see them play out on American news. Laughed too that other time, sometime in early March, when she was brainstorming a seminar topic for a media class, and Fadishola, in his usual jovial way, said, "What Africa can teach the United States about democracy." It had taken her a moment to realize he was flipping the script, the way Western media often painted Africa as a failed democratic experiment. But it was through him she realized that the world was only now waking up to the fragility of democracy, and that no matter how a nation prided itself on being a beacon of freedom, greed and tyranny were born to politics everywhere and not the property of one continent. And now it was summer, the awaited summer, and Fadishola still had not fulfilled his promise. But the promise, no matter how small, mattered. Ogbonna reminded herself of this every time she received another video of Fadishola dancing. Very childish act for a man 4 years older than her. He had been sending her those videos since the grudge began and had vowed never to stop until she replied. She was the kind who held on to her pledges. That was why, whenever those queer NGOs back home invited her to speak to trans girls at the safe houses, places she had once lived herself, back in the early days of her hormonal transition, she would ask them to make promises never to fail their new bodies. Their gender transition, she would say, was a grace towards perfection, a doorway into a newer self so they could reach back and snatch what life had denied them when they lived as boys. Even Chiwetalu, whom she barely knew, kept his promise and visited the following weekend with a Trader Joe's bag. He wore black shorts and a long-sleeved body hug that accentuated the firmness of his arm and upper chest, with Georgetown University Hoyas inscribed in bold letters. He might have received the shirt during his orientation. Ogbonnaya wore hers only at home and to the gym, except for the thick grey graduate school shirt she wore to the library on final weeks to command respect from those noisy undergraduates who chatted loudly, forgetting they were in the library. "You won't believe what happened to me this week," Chiwetalu said when he sat on the only couch in her apartment, facing Ogbonnaya, who sat on the bed. He told her about his Walmart shopping trip on Thursday. He had gone shopping and bought a container of County Crock. He had thought it was ice cream, only to discover it was butter when he returned from his lab orientation on Friday and scooped a spoonful into his mouth. Now his uncle won't stop using the story to start conversations with friends. "Please come and have it," Chiwetalu said with safe importance. He unraveled the nylon that stuck to the small grey container. The condensation rolled down like beads. "These people don't know how to label things. I am not a fan of butter, sir." Ogbonnaya laughed. He fascinated her with this grand gesture and the pride on his face. She could sense he felt like he had given her the most incredible gift by taking the 40-minute train ride with a container of frozen butter. She watched him answer a call from home and spoke with that form of seniority familiar with older brothers. His voice rose high as he advised the other person, perhaps a sibling, not to allow another uncle to take their land. Ogbonnaya walked to the fridge to keep the butter and imagined she was engaged to Chiwetalu, not Fadishola. If they were married in the pre-colonial era, he would be the kind of husband who returned from hunting trips with different bushmeat solely for her. Then he would enjoy watching her sing or break into a dance as he blew his flute. They would be the kind of couple whose happiness would also annoy people like Chiwetalu's kinsmen, who would discourage him from spending too much time with his wife and advise it will make her think herself equal to her husband. Of course, Chiwetalu would not care because he loved her and kept her vow, unlike Fadishola, who had encouraged her to travel abroad so he could easily cheat on her. But wasn't it better to tell someone you once loved that you don't love them anymore, rather than deceiving them? It was the deception that broke the soul, not the statement. Later, they went for a walk on campus and then visited the Johns Hopkins Medical School on Wolf Street, where Chiwetalu proudly stood in front of tall brick-layered buildings, smiling as Ogbonnaya took pictures of him. On their way back to her apartment, in a shared Uber, because they were too exhausted to walk, Ogbonnaya leaned toward Chiwetalu and watched the careful way he edited the pictures, trying filter after filter until he found the perfect match that brightened his dark skin and the background. Chiwetalu told her in Igbo that his relatives from his father's side now followed him on Facebook to confirm whether he was in America. They used to think nothing good would ever come out of his family, especially since his father, the youngest of his grandfather's 8 children, died from a mysterious illness that left his foot swollen and his stomach bulging. An envious person, Chiwetalu said with a squeezed face, had planted a sham in his father's palm tree farm, which his father stepped on. People said it was another palm tree seller from the neighboring village who might have done it. But Chiwetalu, his mother, and 3 siblings knew it was his father's oldest brother. He was envious that Chiwetalu's father could do so well in his palm tree farm and sponsor all his children in university. But he had made history, Chiwetalu added, as the first person in his extended family to go abroad. He gave a short, dry laugh that made the driver stare from the rearview mirror. Chiwetalu cross-checked his edited pictures again, as though the memory of home reminded him to do better. He smiled, satisfied, his face innocuous. Vengeance, Ogbonnaya thought, was the bread of living. As some people clung to hope to survive, Others clung to vengeance to sustain them. Had Ogbonnaya not kept her trans identity private and not posted pictures of herself on social media like her other trans friends, she would have been editing her pictures the way Chiwetel did, bearing in mind all those who had wronged her, like Brother Paulinus, her parish catechist when she was 13. He had called her possessed during catechism classes when she wore her mother's red lipstick so that Kenneth, the handsome boy in their class, would notice her. She had heard Kenneth tell a group of boys that he loved girls when they applied red lipstick. Brother Paulinus would call her possessed again when she used roots as her baptismal name. He slapped her face and told her to change it to Solomon because she needed God's mercy and wisdom for the dangerous path she was taking. She wished Brother Paulinus were here so she could show him she now belonged to that class of Nigerians for whom living abroad was the most outstanding achievement. She who had grown up with a single mother and lived in a one-bedroom apartment. Chiwetel smiled as he read the comments pouring in. Perhaps he imagined how each relative viewed the photos with a tint of jealousy for a life they will never have. She too would have viewed comments this way because she knew that people who knew her in the past as a boy were always waiting and praying for something terrible to happen to her so they could blame her lifestyle and use her story to support their belief of going against nature. That evening, after Chiwetel left, a heavy silence settled in, replacing their shared warm laughter. Ogbonnaya sat on the bed after seeing him off at the door, her eyes fixed on where he once sat, the unfinished drinks on the wooden table before her looked so suddenly distant. Then, as it often did whenever she was home and not preoccupied with her research or cooking, her mind circled back to Fadishola. Sometimes it brought regret for past opportunities she had turned down, like refusing to marry Vincent Canada to undergo her gender transition. She had dated him during her third year at the University of Lagos, this Canadian Nigerian on a 2-year exchange program with the Department of Fine and Applied Arts, where he was studying the sculptures of Ben Ewonwu. Everyone called him weird for his liberal ideologies and added Canada to his name to distinguish him from another Vincent in the department. It was Vincent Canada's idea to marry and take her to Canada right after graduation, but she had declined, partly because of the arrogance in his voice, as though he were her only savior, and partly because at 23, she realized how she had spent her teenage years performing and subduing her femininity to be liked by everyone. What she had wanted back then was to grow into an adult and own her own life on her terms, and she was so sure her gender transition would pave that way. Then there were other days when the thoughts of Fadishola left her with a sharp, edging questions. She wondered if she had made the right decision in leaving sex work, if her life was none better than the other trans girls she once lived with in the safe house, girls she had watched with mix of disdain and self-righteousness, especially during the tension wars between the mummies of Nigeria and the Duchess babe, those femi queens who always fought over men at the private parties she attended in Lagos. But now, she wondered which woman was with Fadishola. Before Chiwetel's visit, he had sent a video from a club. He was singing her favorite song of the year, Chike's Beautiful People. A woman sat beside him. Her hair gleamed under the strobe lights, expensive and well-laid, and her skin was flawless. She didn't look at the camera, not once, not even a blink. Ogbonnaya knew that word. She had followed married men to private clubs where phones were not allowed. She had met other trans women and cross-dressers from different states. She knew how to look expensive as the men expected, with her smooth skin from costly screen and high-end silky wigs that fell like waterfalls from behind. But who was this woman? She picked up her phone from the bed, replayed the video, zoomed and scrutinized the woman's face. Was this how the wives of the men she used to sleep with felt? making video calls across oceans, their eyes darting, their hearts uneasy, suspecting and knowing fully well that another woman was with their husband. But at least she had been respectful to those women. At least she held onto her panties during sex and never forgot them at dawn when leaving. At least she gave the men space during pause with their wives by sitting far away on the dresser or spending time cleaning herself up in the restroom until they knocked in the bedroom door to signal that they were done. I would love to stop here. Thank you.
I can start with a softball.
Okay.
Chibuike, can you talk about, I'm curious anyway, about some of the, because your thesis was a collection of short stories.
Yes.
Can you talk about some of the work you've been doing, like transforming that and revising that into these connected stories or novel stories?
Yeah. Yes. So I think the workshop I had with you, I workshopped this piece.
Yeah.
And then one of the advice you gave me was that I should, because then the idea was that I'm working on a collection of short stories, right? And then you told me to expand on the stories because I was limited by time due to the weight of the short story. I was trying to follow the form, but then you told me to expand on it, to expand on the characters, and also to go beyond the end. And I think I rolled my eyes then because I was so tired and I didn't want to go back to the story. I was so tired with the story. But this was the first story I rewrote when I started the fellowship, and then I think it opened the way for other stories. So we have Sister Toby, we have other stories there. They are kind of like linked. So here, for example, I mentioned Ogbonnaya is a trans woman, and then she mentioned something about the fight between the mummies of Nigeria and the Femme Queens. And in Sister Toby's part, she belonged to a group called, the mummies of Nigeria, so they do meet at parties. So the story is, although I have different characters, but they are kind of like interconnected lives in the narrative. Yes, thanks.
What was the most important lesson you learned during your Sparks Fellowship?
I don't know. I don't know. It's, wow. I think, I'm trying to think back. I'm still doing the fellowship. It ends next month. I think it's the idea of like grace, to give myself grace, because I'm such a crybaby, right? So when the stories are not going well, I start crying, because that's the only thing I know how to do. And then I cry, and then I gather myself back, and then I go back to work. But I think it's sometimes, I think maybe I was a bit greedy. I was trying to, I also have another manuscript with like, let's say, a traditional novel. So my plans when I started the fellowship was to use the fall semester to complete my current manuscript, and then to use the spring semester and start working on the other novel, but it failed, right? Because writing is such a slow thing. So I think that is what I learned. Writing is such a slow thing, and writing requires that idea of like patience, and there's also the need to always for me, in terms of craft, to always go beyond that idea of because in narrative we do talk about the idea of like character desire and then conflict, but there's always room for a writer to go beyond that and just look at let's say the micro sections of characterization. So let's talk about issues of class, let's talk about politics, let's talk about social issues and how they affect these characters, and just psychology and just worldview. And I think just having that time just gave me that sense to think deeply and sit deeply and sit with my characters for a long time. So the idea of like patience with your writing, and also the idea of like sitting with your characters for a long time, I think it helps. Yes.
You mentioned going beyond the desires of the characters. So what aspects of the protagonist came naturally to you in terms of the writing process, and what was more difficult to write truthfully about?
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I think my writing covers what I do frequently in my work, or what I see coming up frequently is always the theme of nostalgia. So it's very important in my work how the past kind of like influences like the present. And so for this story, I don't know what inspired it. Oh, I think I was reading, I can't remember the novel by this writer who lives in Maryland. She always writes about Baltimore, and then I think I came across that word, row houses, and then I started interpreting it for something else, and so that was what started the story. And so I have like different drafts, different structures, and I think when I finally got the perfect draft for this story, I kind of like, I was so kind of like ashamed, because like this is advice, Roy write different horrible stories. It's not horrible stories, like different horrible drafts with different beginning and ending and the rest. So I think in terms of, for your question, I think I was so engaged with that idea of like, oh, this is a character who wants to like go back home, right? And then we have like the trans migration. That is my idea of like, I like to include like the political, because I feel it affects people. It kind of like slows people's life. So I was thinking about that. So I had to like think deeply. I do tell people I do what I call like the character interview. I ask my characters uncomfortable questions, which is crazy, but then I keep this diary where I ask the question and I answer it myself. So thinking about this, I had to move beyond that idea of like, oh, this character wants to go home, and then there's that immigration, like trans policies and the rest, and then her past life as a sex work, and I had to like look at certain things, like ask questions about like age, that idea of like class, family, background. I have like this checklist of things I do ask my characters when I'm done with the first draft, just to understand them better. So I think I like to classify it as major arc for a character and the micro arc. So the major arc is always in terms of plot, or in terms of the story, like this character wants this, and then there's a conflict here, and then the micro level is more of like thinking about other things that makes a person, just going beyond the idea of like conflicts and desire, just to, create a living person